Good evening, everybody. You know, I want to invite everybody. There actually are some seats in the rows, and for those who are on the wall, I'd like to invite you to take a seat if you wish, and you may not wish. But if you do, I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to be able to do that. That means you can just walk right across people. Just say, excuse me, though, you know, when you walk in the rows. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This is the first in a series of town hall meetings. I want to first of all thank my colleagues for coming out. I want to thank, where'd Kwame Brown go? There he is. Kwame Brown, who I think is clear will be the next chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia. And Kwame, I know at least one person that serves in that capacity, so if you want to arrange a meeting with him, I can probably help you with that, okay? And of course, Michael Brown. I don't know where Michael, there's Michael over there, at-large member, Michael. And Mr. Enthusiasm, my dear longtime friend who is helping to host us tonight. I want to thank him for stepping up and being the first to do this. Councilmember Harry Thomas Jr. I'm going to make some very brief comments, and then we're going to get to what the core of the evening is, and that is you. I wanted to do this because it is an opportunity to hear from the people of the District of Columbia. We're going to do 8 of these. They're going to be 2 a week until we get to the end of October. We're obviously doing Ward 5 tonight. We're doing Ward 3 on Thursday night, and then we will unfold the rest of the wards as we go forward into the month. It's an opportunity for you to hear something from me in terms of what I stand for, but maybe it's more importantly for me, and that is to be able to hear from you. And not just questions. It doesn't just have to be questions. I want you to be able to feel like you can make suggestions, make comments, because that's the kind of administration you're going to find with a Gray administration. And that is an open, transparent willingness to be able to hear from the citizens of the District of Columbia, and we want to have that during this process. You all heard Councilmember Thomas talk about being one city. Well, I happen to believe that. It is an aspiration for me. It is a goal. It is a desire. And there are those who would say you never will achieve it, and that may well be true. But that doesn't mean you should stop trying to achieve it, right? We have 600,000 people who live in the District of Columbia, and we ought to be working hard to figure out how we bridge the gaps that exist. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that we do have divisions in this city at this point, don't we? We have geographic divisions, we have economic divisions, and unfortunately, we have racial divisions in this city, and I want to work hard to be able to bring those together. Anybody who knows anything about me, you know that I've spent my entire life trying to bring people together. I'm a proud product of the public schools of the District of Columbia. I feel like I got a great education in the public schools of the District of Columbia. I did go to high school right across the street, and that is Dunbar High School. And I want to commend Ken Amos for having done a fantastic job for what formerly was Armstrong High School, that now is a public charter school. To see this building having been restored in the way it is really uplifting, because I don't know when Armstrong opened, but it had to be in the early 19th century, early 20th century, maybe in the 19th century for all I know. But it is a historic building, and I'm glad to see it's back in service as an educational facility in the District of Columbia. But again, everything I've done with my entire life is to try to figure out how to bring people together, and this is yet another opportunity to do that. You saw some questions up here that are germane to my own platform, and that is education first and foremost. For those of you who may not be clear, education is the top priority for me in the District of Columbia. And if you are not clear, I support heartily education reform in the District of Columbia. We have had too many of our kids to fail, and we want to make sure that we improve educational outcomes for our kids. And I look forward as mayor to be able to lead education reform to new heights in the District of Columbia, working in a collaborative way with you. Let's be clear about something, that education reform and collaboration are not mutually exclusive. They can be done together. We can talk to people, we can get people together and move forward educational outcomes for our children. The economy. We heard about jobs up here. And frankly, there obviously is an inextricable relationship between education and our economy. We have this strange phenomenon in the city, and that is today we have more jobs in this city than we had 4 years ago. And we obviously have more unemployment than we had 4 years ago. The answer, at least on its face, is obvious. And that is, a lot of those jobs that are being created, we don't have people that are getting the opportunity to be able to qualify for those jobs, and we've got to be able to close that gap. That's why career and technical education in our secondary schools is important. That's why we opened a community college. And that's why we need a Department of Employment Services that really does train people for jobs that really exist in the District of Columbia today. We also want to make sure that we continue to see public safety improve in the city. You know what? I want to be the first to say that I am absolutely proud that we have one of the lowest levels of homicides in this city that we've had in 4 decades, 5 decades, however long. There is no question that homicides are down all over the country, and certainly in this region. In Prince George's County, the same experience. And I'm not sure we know exactly why, but the fact of the matter is that homicides are down. And one of the things I want to build on is community policing. Get more of our police officers out on the streets in our neighborhood. If they're walking, on segways, on bikes, and motor scooters, no more drive-by community policing. And we also have to do something else. And that is, as we get into better times, we need to figure out how we create more workforce housing. We have only 20% of our police officers, 19% to be exact, of our police officers who actually live in the District of Columbia, and only about 12 to 15% of our firefighters who live in the District of Columbia. And frankly, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could create incentives to bring more of our first responders back into the city to be able to live in our midst and become a part of our communities, become a part of the civic life of this city. And frankly, it would be fine with me if our police officers who live in the city take their police cars home, because I think that police car sitting on the block is a crime deterrent in and of itself. And yes, we do have significant financial problems. You know, we've been fighting budget reduction after budget reduction after budget reduction, and we're back at it again. Chief Financial Officer told us just last week another $175 million problem. $100 million reduction in revenue that we thought was coming in the door, and $75 million of overspending. And we're going to correct those problems. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be painless. I'm not going to stand here and sell people the blue sky, okay? We have cut so much out of this budget that we're not only down to the bone, but we're cutting into the bone marrow at this stage as we look at reductions that have to be made. But we have no choice. The bank account is almost depleted, you all. We had a fund balance 4 years ago of $1.5 billion. And that fund balance has been used to try to deal with the recession that we're in. But that fund balance is down, way down from what it was 4 years ago, and we have no more reserves to dip into to be able to balance our budget. And what that means is if the money doesn't come in the door, we've got to be able to right-size our government to make sure that we live within our means. And you know, a lot of people are going to shake their heads and say, I understand. But I understand also that it's fine until you see something that's important to you that starts to get cut. I understand that also. So I'm going to ask you to help me establish the priorities in the District of Columbia. So that as we start reducing budgets, as we will have to do, we will do that together. And by the way, we're not going to talk for months and months about these decisions. We're going to talk about them. We're going to get on with it. We're going to make the tough decisions that have to be made. And we're going to make sure that we are the best city in the nation on any index that anybody wants to measure. And so, education, the economy and jobs, public safety, and the public trust. Those are all things that we're going to work hard on, and we will do this together. The only reason we won't do it together is because you choose not to be a part of the process. And in a democracy, that is your option also. But it's my option at the end of the day when you hold me accountable to stand up and say, I invited you to the party, so don't criticize the party now because it ain't the way you like it, okay? So come on in. Come on in. As my parents used to say, come on in, the water's fine. So come on in. And tonight is the commencement of that effort. Tonight is the beginning of a process that will be continuous, and that is hearing from you in a variety of ways. So I want to start to open it up now, but before I do that, I want to introduce our facilitator, a gentleman who is a good friend. He's done facilitation all across this city and is a real expert. And that is a gentleman by the name of Don Edwards. Don, I'm going to ask you to welcome us quickly, and then we'll move right into questions and comments.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Gray. We've had the ground rules up so you could already see them. We don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them. I'm joined by Gretchen Wharton, who should be right over there. She's holding her hand up. And Denise Johnson. Denise is right over here. If you will hold your hands up, we'll come to you. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to everybody, so the part about keep your questions and comments brief is very important. We don't really have time for speeches or any of that tonight. You also, however, have this sheet. If you will fill it out and give it to people as you leave, we will be very appreciative of that. It helps us to make sure that we hear from you in all the different ways we can. These questions are also up on the One City website, and if you want to go there after tonight and also answer them, we'll appreciate that. So is that all right? These ground rules all right? All right, I'm going to come in the middle aisle. Get your hands up, and I'll call on the first person.
Before we do that, I'm gonna make it a little more direct and Don. Y'all know what a keynote question is? You know what a keynote question is? That's when somebody stands up and takes 5 minutes to ask a question. So, you know what? It's not fair to everybody else in the room. So, if you got a question, ask it. If you got a comment, make it, but make it as succinct as you can. And I will try to make my answers as succinct, or my comments as succinct as possible, because we do want to hear from as many people as we possibly can. Thank you, Don.
Sir, why don't you stand up? Hey, say your name.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, and my mayor, Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Bob.
I have a concern, and you have skimmed across it, but my concern is with our monies the way they are currently. I'm concerned about the millions of dollars that Mr. Jamal owes to the D.C. government, and we haven't gotten a payment on his properties or the money that he owes us. Please respond.
Thank you.
What is it that he owes? Could you be more?
He owes millions of dollars to the D.C. government.
Well, I think anybody that, I don't know the details of that, Bob, but I would love to get the information to find out what it is that's owed, because obviously we need to collect from anybody and everybody at this stage. We want our money. We want our money. So you give me the details of those millions, and I promise you, if you give me the details tonight, I'll be knocking on his door tomorrow.
Is this side better?
And you know
Gretchen?
what? My background is in the nonprofit world, right, Lori? And man, there's nobody that can beg for money like somebody in the nonprofit world.
Okay, Gretchen.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Uh, my name is Vaughn Bennett, and I'm a candidate for ANC 5B04 commissioner. But my question is, what would you do to hire more youth and city residents on the DC Fire Department? And are you going to require the firefighters to live within a 20-mile radius of DC instead of hundreds of miles away in other states?
Well, I think you heard my commitment to trying to get more first responders living in the District of Columbia. First of all, we've been through, I think, efforts to require people to live in the District of Columbia and to live within a certain radius, and I think there was litigation that overturned a lot of that. But one of the things I think we can do, I've often wondered, why is it that we don't have some of the academy-type experiences in our own high schools? Why can't we expose our 11th and 12th graders to opportunities in being police officers and being firefighters in the 11th and 12th grade? And presumably, by definition, they live in the city, right? If they don't live in the city and are attending our public education, we ought to be collecting tuition from their families. So I'm going to start on the assumption that they actually live in the city. So I would like to open the door to having our secondary schools provide orientation and training and starting to prepare our young people for first responder positions. We at one time also, when I was at, and Lori, you may remember this, when I was at Covenant House, we had this Youth Opportunity Grant Program. And one of the organizations was the Academy, working with young people to prepare them for positions as firefighters. And again, we ought to resurrect that. We ought to be using our money in the Department of Employment Services to prepare young people for those opportunities. And the third thing is, we have now a community college. It is a little bit over a year old. It is about 14 months old. And why shouldn't we be using the community college at Bacchus or PR Harris or 801 North Capitol Street to be able to prepare young people, not necessarily all that young, but prepare people for opportunities as first responders? So my take on it is not necessarily to go after those people who already live outside the city, but try to create an indigenous workforce by training those people who are right here in the city now.
Good evening, Council Chair Gray. My name is Renee Goods, and my question is about education reform. And basically my question is, what will education reform look like for the next 4 years? Will it include more schools being closed, teachers being gripped? What will that look like, and how can we support you with the education reform with this upcoming election?
Well, I think first of all, I'm reaching out to say that I want involvement. I want involvement by all the stakeholders. And that means to me, parents, it means teachers, it means administrators who are involved, people who are in the school community directly, and those who are in communities, because a lot of people care about education and education reform in the District of Columbia. First of all, with respect to closing schools, I hope we don't have to close any more schools, because that would suggest our population is declining. It stabilized last year, and there are some early indications that we may have some increases in the DC public schools enrollment this year. Now, it stabilized last year for one reason in particular, and I'm very proud of that, and that was because our pre-kindergarten services were expanded so tremendously. I was involved in doing the legislation for that. My colleagues on the council joined me in doing that. And we now, by the way, are the first city in America, 4 years early, to be able to say that we have a seat for every 3- and 4-year-old in the District of Columbia in a public education program. What that is going to do is give young people a relatively earlier start on education, and I think will create more staying power in a variety of ways. One, these kids will have learned to do some of the basics earlier in life than they would have if they're in the kindergarten or first grade, and hopefully it will attract more young parents to stay in the city, to come to the city, and keep their kids in our public education system. What I'm hopeful of, frankly, is that when we look at it this year, that we will see that we have had a stabilization or some increase in the DC public schools as well as charter schools, which means then our public education enrollment is growing. So at the end of 4 years, I'd like to see us have stabilized our enrollment. that our dropout rates are down because we figured out how to have good middle schools and good secondary schools in the city, that we will have restored systematically career and technical education to our schools, not necessarily creating more CTE schools, but actually embedding curricula in our secondary schools across the city so that a young person can go to a high school and have a comprehensive curriculum. And frankly, that we will have begun to reform special education, which is a travesty. We spent last year $166 million on putting kids into private schools, $93 million this year on transporting kids, and almost $10 million on attorney's fees. Just so you get the flavor of what the transportation costs are, when you do the math, and let me give you an example. A student in regular education, whatever that may mean, the uniform per student funding formula says that is $9,000 per student. The cost for transportation, this doesn't include any education at all. The cost for transportation of kids in special education is $23,750 per year per student, almost 3 times the cost of education of other students. That is unconscionable. And frankly, given the difficult fiscal times that we're in, it's an opportunity to save some of those dollars and reinvest them, and frankly, reinvest them in the front end of our education system. And when we do that, we will reduce the level of developmental delays of some of our kids, and frankly, eliminate developmental delays if we can get these kids early enough, and over the long haul, not immediately, but over the long haul, start to reduce the percentage of kids who wind up in special education in the first place. So that's what it'll look like to me.
Okay, I know that there are lots of hands, and somebody's not going to be happy with me, but we're going to try to get around to everybody. We're going to go for about another hour, though, so we've got time. So I'm going to go right up here. We're going to cover as much of the room as we can. Now, this lady is going to need some interpretation.
Hello, I'm Mayor Gray. My name is Sylvie, and I'm from Gallaudet University. And you had mentioned about special education and those students that are in that program. My concern is that the deaf and hard of hearing students should be separate, like in a different category from that, because it's a completely different population. So what resources are there going to be to meet their needs? You said that a lot of money was spent on special education students, but they actually didn't spend that much on the students themselves. It was actually spent on other things, so it didn't necessarily meet the needs of the deaf and hard of hearing students. I know that based on my experience in doing an internship in the social work field, I realize that there is a need with those deaf and hard of hearing students, and do you happen to know the percentage of the deaf and hard of hearing students who are here in our public schools? So if we look at the statistics, I think that that's how we can then better help those students who are there, and then Gallaudet can also play an important part in that collaboration.
I don't know the percentage. But in my opinion, I don't know. There should be no need for special education for somebody who simply has a communication challenge. We ought to be able to figure out how to do that. And frankly, one of the ways in which we can do it is to begin to teach some of our regular education teachers how to sign. That's not an impossibility. I happen to believe very strongly in a principle of inclusion, and that is being able to create every opportunity we can to have a person who may have a disability of some sort to have the opportunity to be among their peers who don't have a disability. School is about an education, of course, but it's also about socialization. And that is, we say that students are supposed to live in a larger, wider world, and then we separate them when they go into an educational environment. People learn to get along with one another by being around people, not being somewhere else and talking about it. It's one of the reasons why I focus so much on the concept of one city. And one city isn't just about Northeast and Northwest working together. It's also about people with disabilities working effectively together with people without disabilities. We know it's axiomatic. When you're around people, you start to feel a lot more comfortable with them. And when you're not around people who may have some form of differentness, there is a barrier that's created that becomes almost insurmountable as you get older in life. So I think we ought to reach out to our teachers and train some of them. And there are some who undoubtedly will step up and say, I'd like to be trained. And we got the preeminent university right here, Gallaudet University, which, by the way, I think has programs. Well, you got Kendall, you got the Model Secondary School, you got Gallaudet, you got programs that begin at K and go all the way through graduate school there. And we ought to be doing more reaching out. We ought to have graduate students from Gallaudet who come into our schools and work with our staff in our public schools to help train them in communication skills with people who are hard of hearing or who may be deaf.
Thank you. Gretchen?
Good evening, Mayor. Gary Clark, Sr., Pep Rally for Peace in the Streets. And my question to you is in reference, as you know, I do a lot of work for homeless. And my question to you, with the rising number of homeless youth that we have in the city, what are we going to do? How are you going to approach that? What is the plan that we put in place? And as you stated, people being around people is the way to make things happen and us work together. So how do we create programs to put the homeless people back into the mainstream of living around us and not separated from us?
Well, it's interesting you'd ask that question because before I became a council member, I was executive director of Covenant House, which is an organization that serves homeless, runaway, and at-risk young people, ages 16 to 21. You know, and I've worked in the area of homelessness in a variety of ways, and there really are three distinct populations. There are homeless families that have one set of unique challenges. There are individuals who we see on the street, individuals, singles on the street, who have another set of challenges. And then you have homeless youth who are almost invisible, even though they have a very profound problem. Homeless youth oftentimes move from one place to the other. They are homeless for a long time before they wind up in the system. And frankly, one of the things with those young people that's important is to create the kind of programs we had at Covenant House, at Sasha Bruce, at Latin American Youth Center, to be able to reach out to those young people. And frankly, in those instances, you have more of an opportunity to reunify them with their families than otherwise might be the case. But at the end of the day, it's three things. It's getting them an education, getting them a place to live, and getting them a job in some instances. And those organizations, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but they work pretty effectively together at this stage to try to reach out to these young people. And there are more homeless youth in this city than I think people realize because it is more of an invisible problem than is homelessness with other youth. So one, I would say continue with the collaboration between these organizations and continue to try to work. You know, there's nothing different about what I'm about to say, but working with these families because many of these kids wind up in the situations they're in because they become distanced, for want of a way of putting it, from their families. And it's not always the mother or the father's fault either. Some of these young people are very difficult to deal with. But again, trying to work with those families to try to create a place for them to come back home. You know, and I'll make this shorter. I do something on the second Saturday of every month, and that is a youth hearing. And we've had young people who come down there who have all kinds of problems. And there was a young man who came down there who was a student at McKinley High School. And he was homeless. He had nowhere to go. He was living somewhere in Maryland because his mother had put him out. And we actually sat there over a period of a couple of hearings. I became a case manager. I was the chairman of the case management program in the Council of the District of Columbia. And we worked. We actually got the two of them together and wound up getting him back at home. And we started with the goal of reunifying them with the belief that that was possible. And he's now graduated from McKinley High School. And I see Sherman, I see him all over the city. You know what? When you're in these jobs, it doesn't hurt to have a human services background, I'll tell you. Doesn't hurt to have a human touch either.
Denise?
Mr. Mayor, I want to first of all say God bless you, I love you, and thank you so much. But I'm going to keep it short. My thing is, you talking about the difficulties as far as the school system. My thing is, why can't we get something to go with the training for the parents. I know we got parenting and stuff like that, because see, if we do that, then it'll be a lot easier for the teachers. It starts at home. You know, it starts at home. So maybe we can start some kind of organization for the parents. Now, I'm doing parenting now. I've been doing it for like 5 years now, and I'm trying to get something for that. But it starts with that. You talk about difficulties. You know, we can't blame it on the kids because they didn't ask to come here. So, you know, generation. Now, I know you can't do it in one term and this and that, but if it's possible, please get us something for the parents so we can try to buckle down.
No, it is possible.
We can't put it on the kids. They need to buckle up, but we need to, as parents, buckle down. Because I got a 6-year-old and I got a 14-year-old that's going to McKinley Tech too, which you just mentioned. You know, we need to buckle down too.
Well, you're absolutely right. And one of the things we did with the early childhood education programs was we recognized that we were going to get very young parents. With some of these 3 and 4-year-olds, you're talking about the parents being 19, 20, 21 years of age. And we have actually injected into some of our programs now working with these parents, because we know the kids have to have somebody to bring them there. So it's an opportunity to work with these parents also to help them understand how to be parents. I mean, I think there's a lot of people in here who know we have a lot of parents who don't know how to be parents, you know, and they do things, and they're not willfully hurting their children. They just simply don't know other ways of dealing with those children. You know, and interestingly enough, I guess it's good not to be a career politician, because somebody told me about early childhood education that if you make the investments there, you probably will never see the full return on it during the time that you're in office, and that, you know, demands upon politicians are, show me something now, now, now. Well, the reality is that early childhood education will pay off in the long run, and it will pay off for those children who are 3 and 4 years old, and it will pay off for those young parents also if we creatively involve them in the developmental activities of their children. And frankly, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the things I'd like to do is open the door to universal access to infant and toddler programs in the District of Columbia as well. Now, that's not going to be easy. However, this is one area where you can use also healthcare dollars to work with those very young children in developmentally stimulating programs. In addition to that, we have an organization. Are you all aware? Have you all heard of EduCare? EduCare is a national organization. They're in 9 cities. They are coming to the District of Columbia. They are building a facility. Warren Buffett and others are involved with the organization doing this. They are building a facility in Parkside, which is in Ward 7, right next to Neville Thomas School. And they will be serving infants and toddlers as well as young people in pre-K. What it will be is not only a program to serve those young people, but it will be a laboratory where we can learn more about not only serving the young people, but also serving those parents. And I think we can develop some programs that will have parents, have trainers coming in who will then learn more about what they can take back to their own programs in terms of not only working with the very young kids, but also those parents.
Okay. I want to make sure that people know that there are index cards that you can hold your hand up, and if you don't want to stand up and say your comment or ask a question, you can write it down, and we're going to interject some of these cards before the night is over. Sir, stand up, please. Your name?
My name is Malcolm Kenton, and I've been living here in the Bloomingdale neighborhood for about a year and 2 months. My question is, what will you do to make it so that every DC resident can live a high-quality life without needing to drive a car or without needing to drive very much? And will you commit to building out the proposed streetcar network and continuing improvements in bicycle infrastructure and metro, rail, and bus service?
What'd you say again? No, just kidding. I mean, what you're talking about is getting people out of automobiles, and we know how difficult that is. But I think we are committed to having a multimodal transportation system in the city. One, I do support streetcars. I want to make that very clear. I support streetcars. We have a commitment to build a 37-mile streetcar system over the next 20 years, between now and 2030. That will cost us $1.5 billion. That money will come out of our capital budget, and we'll have to orchestrate that carefully now, given the financial demands that we experience. So, the streetcar system is slated to begin on 8th Street, which you probably know, and then will be expanded out from there. One of the things that I asked for, working with my colleagues, was a plan for how this system was going to be built, and we still don't have a fully fleshed out plan. The questions around how will we get around the lawn farm requirements where they don't allow the wires to be in certain areas that goes back, centuries in the District of Columbia. Where is the maintenance plant going to be? Where will the terminal points be? What will be the relationship to Amtrak and to Union Station, especially for that line? Where will the lines be, and what will be the orchestration of those lines so that there's some predictability in what we do? I do believe that we should create more bicycle lanes, but I think we ought to do it in concert with communities so that people know what's going to happen in their communities. They don't look up one day and just see a parking lane gone. We want to work directly with people in order to be able to do that, to accomplish that. I also think we should expand the circulator system. The circulator has expanded into certain areas that are within and adjacent to the downtown area. There has been some discussion about taking it into Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. There are a lot of people who want to do that. I think that's a good idea. The circulator system is to some extent subsidized now by the District of Columbia government, and we'll continue to do that to the extent we can. But what it has made is the circulator a lot more affordable. And we also have to make sure that we invest, and the city has stepped up, even before Maryland and Virginia has done it, stepped up and made a very substantial investment in our metro system. We have agreed to $50 million a year to maintain the system, and we actually added to our subsidy this year to maintain the metro system. And frankly, there's more we can do with buses. They're beginning to experiment now with varieties of ways of the metro buses, not necessarily stopping at every stop. The express buses, like on Georgia Avenue, that maybe stop at 6 different stops and get people downtown quickly. There is no way that we can sustain ourselves with increasing numbers of automobiles. I mean, you see the gridlock all day, every day in the District of Columbia. And then the environmental effects as well. The energy costs and the polluting of the environment. We've got to be able to work to get people out of automobiles, and one of the ways you do that is with a multimodal transportation system.
Gretchen.
Hi, my name is Darlene Pearson. This is very emotional for me. I put my little girl in DC Public School. She's 3 years old. I didn't want to do it, but I did it anyway. And within 3 weeks, every single week, she sustained injuries. The first week, she came home with a black eye and her mouth messed up. They claimed that she was kicked in the face by accident. The next week, she came home with her knees busted up and her arm messed up. They claimed she fell on her own. The next week, she came home with her hand messed up. I contacted Chancellor Reed's office, and the response that I got was that I should be grateful, basically, that she's in this Montessori program. And, instead of looking for somewhere else to put her, I should, use my time more productively and basically try to talk with the principal. Well, I want to know, will you have a task force, because bullying has become a real problem in this country, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And when you have a 3-year-old coming home with a black eye, it's too much. So will you have someone, an office set up that will take these things very, very seriously? Because obviously we're not taking them serious right now.
Well, what school did this happen at?
It happened at Marshall Elementary, and by the grace of God, I was able to move her to another school.
Well, I think one of the first questions would be, is there something happening at Marshall that says that the children are not being supervised and taught in the way that they should be? I'm going to underscore again that I am an absolutely enthusiastic, ardent supporter of pre-K programs for children, because I think they learn socialization skills earlier, and it gets them going academically, educationally, more quickly than they otherwise would. One of the things that I've said is that I want to have a fully empowered chancellor as well. So I would want to work with a chancellor to be able to know what that person who's leading the schools really recommends in addressing problems like this. But I'd also want to know that we are being responsive to parents when they raise questions like this. I'm not going to step in and try to micromanage the school system, or step into individual schools and do some of the things that I think have been antithetical to school reform in the past, because I think that's counterproductive. But I would want to know, when these issues arise, how have they been handled? Because people will bring issues to you in the community when they don't feel like they're being properly served at the school level or whatever the level may be. So I guess the question, I'd like to get an answer to this, is why did you have to, and I'm not blaming you, I'm just, why was it necessary that you have to get to this point to start to address some of the concerns that you have raised? What is in place now to address those kind of concerns for a parent like yourself, who has put your very young child in the hands of us in the government, and it should be able to expect that your child will be cared for properly? So that's why I asked for the name of the school. Is that the one in Fort Lincoln? Okay, all right. We'll see what we can find out. If you can give somebody your name and number, we'll see what we can find out and get back to you.
Denise?
Hello,
How you doing?
my name is Forrest Wilson.
Are you really a Cowboys fan?
Yes. Yes. But let me say to you, you are the mayor of D.C. That's Dallas Cowboy.
Yeah. That's why I asked you the question, because I'm a Redskin fan, okay?
Okay, what concerns me is the kids of this world. They're the future of the world. And if we don't take care of them today, what they gonna do for us tomorrow? Nothing. It wasn't for the grandmothers today, the world be in worse shape it is today. It's all of us. It's all of us. Not the mayor, not the council, but it's all of us. We got to take care of these kids. Now, I sit here, I've been working at a school for 49 years and volunteering. These kids are smart. They're smart. But the parents is not taking care of these kids. We have to take care of all of these kids. And like, everybody can't not be a doctor, lawyer. And you trade all these trade schools, you tore them down. And all these kids on the street now. And we got to bring those trade schools back in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think you made a number of excellent points. Beginning with the fact that we do have a lot of grandparents who are raising their grandchildren at this stage. We have far too many fathers who are not involved in the lives of their children at this stage. And we have mothers who are overwhelmed, or in some cases, they're not involved in the lives of their children either. 15% of the children in this city now being raised by grandparents or some other relative other than their parent. And I think we've already acknowledged what you said, and you're absolutely right, and that is we need to bring back options, in our schools, so that those young people who may want to go directly to work after finishing the 12th grade, in fact, will have the opportunity to do that with a marketable skill. It really is unconscionable that we stand here today and say that 70% of the jobs in this city are filled by people who do not live in the District of Columbia. And if we don't, and if we don't have a good educational system in the city, we'll never have a solid indigenous workforce, and that means we won't be self-supporting. And it's even worse in this city, because without the ability to tax income at its source, we don't have the ability to have a commuter tax That means money earned in this city every day, in so many instances goes outside the city, and we can't reach to it. And we're not going to have a commuter tax anytime soon, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that we will. But the way to get around that is have more people who live in the city working in the jobs in the District of Columbia and being able to qualify for them.
Okay. Mr. Gray, I've got a couple of questions that I think are kind of in the same pocket. And one is, with the current budget crisis, will your administration aggressively enforce the first source regulation? And the second
Yes.
question.
And you know what? It shouldn't take a crisis to do that. We have a requirement for those of you who don't know what first source is. It says that if you get a contract above a certain level in the city, 51% of the new hires on those contracts have to be people who live in the District of Columbia. And it doesn't happen a lot. I'll be honest with you. I had a conversation with somebody recently who said, well, you know, we can't find qualified people in the District of Columbia. Well, maybe we need to look for some other qualified contractors in the District of Columbia if you can't find qualified people.
Got another question. What are your plans for displaced residents and local businesses due to all the new development around the city? And how will you promote affordable housing in DC?
Well, I think whoever asked the question knows that those are two very difficult things to do, and there are no glib answers. You know, I guess there are glib answers, but I refuse to give that. Affordable housing, you know, we have 26,000 people on a waiting list for affordable housing in the city. And we have developed a lot of different tools. The council just worked to bring on another one in the last year. It's called inclusionary zoning, where every time a building with 10 or more units now is built in the city, and we got a lot of them going up, you know, right around in the neighborhoods around this area, you have to have a certain percentage of those units that will be affordable. The quid pro quo, you know, you do this, we do that, is that if you will make certain number of those units affordable, we will allow you to go beyond the zoning rules and build more units than you otherwise would be able to do under the existing rules. So that's a tool that we've developed. We've got the Housing Production Trust Fund, which unfortunately hasn't had nearly the amount of money in it in the last 2 years because of our budget problems, because the money comes from people paying the transfer and recordation taxes when a house is sold. 15% of that money goes into the Housing Production Trust Fund, and frankly, the housing market has been so depressed here and elsewhere in the last couple of years, we haven't had that many housing transactions. We have the Home Purchase Assistance Program. We have a lot of tools that are available to us, and we still are not winning the battle. I think we have a couple of opportunities, though. First of all, with new communities, which I want to see developed in the city at a more rapid pace than what has been done. And then, secondly, being able to use some of the land that, for example, at Walter Reed, we have 62.5 acres of land there that will be redeveloped. And we need to work with those developers to make sure that affordable housing is a part of what's developed there. And frankly, one of the pieces of affordable housing is what we talked about before, and that is workforce housing, so that we can encourage people who work for the government to come back here. Police officers, firefighters, and teachers would be at the top of my list of people who we want to have living in the District of Columbia in workforce housing.
Thank you, sir. Gretchen?
Good evening, Mayor-elect. I spent today working with 4 families who have lost their homes and had nowhere to go tonight. No shelter, no housing, no family's house, nothing. They were sleeping in Greyhound stations, in their cars, all around the city because there was no place. And we're talking about people with very small children. I guess all the spending cuts that we've already had over the last few years have really taken a toll on my neighbors and my community and my clients. And in the work I do, it's the worst that it's been in at least 10 years. I guess I wouldn't normally ask you to make me pay more money, but in this case, I'd much rather you raise my taxes than see my neighbors go through that anymore. So I'm wondering whether you're open to doing that.
One of the things that I said in the last week, since the latest round of budget, of financial problems has hit us, is that everything is on the table. But I do think we owe it to the citizens of this city to be able to demonstrate that we have done a comprehensive and exhaustive analysis of spending. Because I think the first thing some people will say is that, have you really analyzed this budget fully enough to make the kind of adjustments on the expenditure side? And we've got to be able to do that. I frankly have never, and people have asked me during this campaign, am I making a commitment to not raise taxes? And not only am I not making that commitment, but I was with a council that in the summer of 2009 raised sales taxes, cigarette taxes, and taxes on gasoline in order to make sure that we were able to continue about $40 million worth of services rather than cutting further. So to me, nothing is off the table. But I think we've got to demonstrate that we've done a thorough job of looking at the expenditure side and demonstrate to people what the consequences would be of further cuts. The example you used, too, I'm going to just go one step further with that. We decry the fact that we have families who wind up in these situations, and we should. And then, frankly, some of the same people who decry that are the same ones who say, I don't want those people living next door to me. And we need to come to grips with that. That is not a new phenomenon. The NIMBY phenomenon in this city and other cities is still alive and well. And I saw it recently when there was an opportunity to move a number of families out of D.C. General, which is a shelter now. It's like D.C. Village has now moved to D.C. General. And it was an opportunity to move a number of those families out of there into apartments. And frankly, it was resisted by folks who did not want them to go into a building that had been used as a service building previously and had been renovated and would have been a perfect opportunity to move these families in. And I say this from a practical perspective. When I was the director of the Department of Human Services, one of the things that I'm proud of is that we got every family out of those hotels, those motels on New York Avenue and downtown. We got every one of them out of there and moved them into an apartment. And frankly, it worked out extremely well because, again, two families living in a hotel room, come on, man. And somebody was obviously getting rich because they were charging like $3,000 a month per family. Can you imagine $6,000 a month, David, for a hotel room? And I went in there. It wasn't like somebody told me the conditions. I was in there and saw the conditions that people were living under. And it was horrific. So again, we've got to have a more empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate perspective on the part of people in this city when we talk about moving people into more humane conditions.
Denise?
I'd like to know if you would entertain a new curriculum here or an addition to the curriculum that we have. I was a special ed teacher for 28 years in the district schools. And one of the things that teachers, parents, and the community complained about mostly was behavioral issues. I'm wondering if you would entertain the idea of adding a social skill curriculum starting in possibly preschool, kindergarten, elementary, and junior high and high school with different aspects to that curriculum, including bullying.
I guess the short answer is yes. I'd want to make sure I consult with the leadership of our educational system. Again, as I said earlier, I'm not going to go in and start running the schools or any of that. But you know what? Having worked a long time, Barbara, in the field of disability, it was always amazing to me that we have things called life skills classes. Everybody should be in a life skills class at some point. Everybody could benefit from it. And you don't have to have a disability or some unusual challenge to be able to benefit from life skills. So personally speaking, I would love to see something like that. But before we did anything, I'd want to consult with those who lead our education programs to make sure this is something that would make sense, in terms of accommodating all grade levels.
Okay, we've got about 25 minutes left, and we're going to still try and get around to everybody. Mr. Gray, I've got 3 questions that basically, I think, get into the same area. And you've talked about it, but I think people would like to hear some more. For instance, you mentioned budget prioritization. Some of the questions and concerns have to do with increases promised to assistant principals and counselors. Where will the money for Chancellery's reform efforts come from? Another question, how about the commitment to senior citizens programs that have been cut? How will the money be put back in the budget? The seniors love you. And as another example, what will you do about detox and women's services drug programs that have been closed down due to budget cuts? A lot of this has to do with prioritization of a little bit of money for a long list of things.
Yeah, and this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier, that everybody will stand up and agree that we have to balance this budget as a general principle. Just don't cut this, don't cut that, don't cut the other. And that's the dilemma that we're going to be faced with. And frankly, I want to use these town hall meetings as an opportunity to hear from people around priorities. You know, when we make the decisions, I want to be able to stand up in front of people and say, you know what, I didn't do this in a vacuum or in the back room somewhere or, you know, at midnight sitting in my office by myself. I did this based on what I heard from people. And you mentioned 3 very important programs. You mentioned, you know, being able to support our educators. And we, by the way, the funds, a lot of the funds for the incentive programs for teachers will come from the private sector. And I hope that we'll be able to sustain that over a long period of time, especially until we get out of this recession that we are in, as deepening for us in the District of Columbia. You mentioned programs for seniors. One of the things I really want to work with, which I don't think costs a whole lot of money, is aging in place programs. We now have 6 chapters in the District of Columbia of aging in place programs. And what they do, frankly, is they create stronger networks among seniors in the District of Columbia, even to the point where there may be 3 or 4 people who would be willing to live together in a house that a particular senior no longer is able to handle effectively on her or his own. So I think that there's some opportunities there as well. And then detox, we continue to experience huge substance abuse problems in the District of Columbia. I think the detox center at DC General has been closed down or privatized. Both, okay, both. Well, but they all are important programs, but frankly, at the end of the day, the reality is we're not going to be able to do everything that we've done in the past. And we're going to make some decisions around that. That's why it's important for me to hear what people think in these settings. But at the end of the day, and I'm saying it repeatedly, we don't have the money to do everything that we have done in the past, nor that everybody wants to do. Everything has been cut in one way or the other in the city, and there will be more cuts.
Gretchen?
Or to go to what the lady talked about over there, maybe there will be tax increases if that's something that people are willing to entertain.
Gretchen?
Good evening, Mayor-elect. My name is George Mitchell. My question, I guess, relates to the kids. Do you have a plan or a task force in mind to address the public health and to reduce the incidence rates of HIV and AIDS for our youth and our kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we've done, we actually are when you compare us to other states, and I'm going to call us a state at this stage, we've done relatively well. When DC General Hospital was closed down, a lot of people don't realize that what the city did was take the money and invest it in a local health insurance program for people who really had no option but to go to DC General Hospital. Today we have in the Healthcare Alliance, we have 55,000 people. And what that has done is placed us, we have only 6.2% of our adults who have no health care insurance now in the city. We are second only to Massachusetts in the extent to which we provide health care insurance to adults in one way or the other. Only 3.2% of our children don't have some form of health care insurance, and we are the best in the nation. We are better than all of the other 50 states in providing that coverage. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that we cover folks. Obama's health care plan is going to give us an even greater opportunity because his health care plan is going to pick up more people under Medicaid and give us greater latitude to be able to cover people in the District of Columbia. But it isn't just having health care insurance. A lot of people have health care insurance, and because they are accustomed to operating in a certain way, they still only go to the doctor when they get sick. They still use the emergency room. And the difference is that instead of going there in an uncompensated care situation, they go there with health care insurance. It is the least effective form of care and the most expensive. So we have got to work, and we've got to work to build a health care system, which we actually are working on in east of the river communities. We've got 3 clinics now that are underway, medical homes that are being developed. And we've got to work with people to change their health care behavior so that people start to realize that as a part of the routine, they go to the doctor, that they go get an annual physical, that they do prevention and early intervention. And there isn't a person in this room that would disagree with that. And then half the people will go out of here and not even remember the discussion that we had tonight. And they will wait until they get ill, have a headache or whatever, and go to the doctor at that point. And frankly, until we change healthcare behavior, which I think is a role that our health department and the state, which we are, the state, takes a leadership role in doing that, we're going to continue to spend more money than we should on health care. HIV/AIDS, when I was the council member in Ward 7, we started the East of the River Initiative, which is now called the Effie Barry Initiative. The incidence of HIV and AIDS in the city is 300% of the national average. We have a 3% incidence rate. It's 1% nationally. And we have now started efforts, and we need to use our schools more effectively to educate kids around what this dread disease is and be able to help them to avoid it in the first place. We finally got permission to do needle exchange programs in the city, which has helped with the transmission of the virus. By the way, I don't know how many of you all read the City Paper article about the gentleman who would take over the district committee if the Republicans win the House. He wants to roll back all of that, which is incredibly offensive. I mean, frankly, we ought to be able to make those decisions for ourselves. I don't think we need somebody from Utah to tell us how to live in the District of Columbia. But you know what? Even if those were programs that somebody had determined not to be effective, it still should be left up to the people of the District of Columbia to make those decisions. What's ironic is you will have people criticize the District of Columbia for having a needle exchange program, for example, and back in their own district that they represent, they have robust needle exchange programs. So again, we've got to be able to retain those cutting edge things in health care that I think do make a difference, and with HIV and AIDS, needle exchange is just one of those programs.
Denise?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. One of my questions is for the nonprofit sector. I run a nonprofit here in Washington, D.C., Ward 5, Good Ground, Good Life. And my question to you is, what are you going to do as far as funding for nonprofit organizations? The last administration, they channeled money to one organization when there's a lot of organizations out here doing that work out here that's really helping these young people in the community. So what are we going to do to address that?
I'm not going to channel any more money to that organization. You know, one of the ideas I have, some of this is predicated on having the dollars, of course, and that is there are certain categories of things that we know are important. Youth violence intervention is one of those. The arts is another one of those. And rather than just saying, here's a check made out to ABC organization, set up a categorical fund that said this money is going to be for youth violence intervention. And then let nonprofits compete by doing proposals for those dollars. You know, you devoted the dollars to the issue, but the issue then, the funding of it to an organization is competitive. We've got to have a competitive environment. I think we will get better solutions when we have a competitive environment. Those that do well will get rewarded, and those that don't won't get rewarded.
Mr. Gray, this young lady came down from the balcony. She's 12 years old.
All
I
right.
think it takes a lot of courage to do this. So what's your question?
And I'd like to invite you to come down to one of our youth hearings. I will be doing at least 3 more of those through the end of December. And I tell you, I'm working on trying to figure out how, as mayor, I can continue to have that kind of involvement with our youth. You know, when I go out in the community and see the young people who are so excited about this election, man, it's like, what a great opportunity it is to be in a job like this, to help young people see that you've been the same place that they have been, that you have the same problems that they have, and that you have a chance to touch them in a way that's going to help them aspire, to recognize they can do the same things that other people do. So I want to try to figure out as mayor how I continue to do that.
My name is Asia, and I attend Hardy Middle School. And last year I learned a lot about how neighborhood school works and how some people are out of bound. And I am out of bound because I live in this district. And so my question is, what are you going to do about fixing high schools in my neighborhood so that I can be a neighborhood student instead of going all the way across the city to Hardy?
Well, we want to make sure that the same level of resources, is put into schools across the city, or funds, and that isn't always the case. As a council member in Ward 7, I had to fight tooth and nail to get H.D. Woodson rebuilt. I started working on that in 2005, and H.D. Woodson still isn't finished. It's going to probably be at least another year before it's finished. So I think being able to make sure that we make the investments in the quality of the buildings that we have, and then making sure that we have the same curricula that are available to young people from whether they live in Ward 8 or whether they live in Ward 3 or Ward 2 or Ward 7, whatever the case may be. We haven't reached that stage yet. And that's not even a criticism. It's just a recognition that the kind of reform that we've been involved in does take time, even though we've been trying to move at a rapid pace. So the goal is to be able to say that we have great neighborhood schools in every neighborhood across the city, and I think we know that we don't at this point.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Gretchen?
We have a 13-year-old who'd like to build on that question.
My name is Miranda Woods, and I go to the same school as Asia, Hardy Middle School. And every day I travel from in this neighborhood all the way up into Georgetown, where Hardy Middle School is, to get a good education. And last year, Michelle Reed said that our very effective principal, Mr. Pope, was going to leave. And he is gone this year, and we now have 4 people in the place of his one place that cannot do the job correctly. Our school with him made AYP for 10 years or something like that straight, and now with these people, on the first day of school, everyone was handed a schedule they said was built off their grades and everything from the past year, which I know is not correct, because for 4 weeks I was stuck with a schedule where I took French last year and they had me in Spanish. I took pre-algebra last year, they had me in that same class again. My brother took beginning band, they had him in beginning band again. I talked to a boy yesterday who still doesn't have a second period class. His schedule is still messed up. There are kids that are getting new schedules every day. And so they're coming into these classes and they've missed 6 weeks of school now, and they don't know anything about these classes. They've missed all that work. And these principals, they have meaningless things to do. The head principal is not even there every day. She's in charge of 2 other schools.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gray.
Well, I happen to be very familiar with what happened at Hardy because we've had the students down to the Wilson building, and frankly, the students and the parents at Hardy have been a model of advocacy on behalf of that school. This situation started a year ago, and I remember last December there was a meeting at the school where there were 300 students and parents who came out to protest the what was alleged at the time, movement of Patrick Pope. You know, one of the things about Hardy that I think is good is that it's great to have great neighborhood schools, but there's nothing wrong with being able to go to another area of the city where you can get a chance to be educated with children, students from other parts of the city as well. Frankly, to this day, I don't know why Mr. Pope was removed. Mr. Pope was an excellent principal by every indicator at Hardy School. And you're right, you're absolutely right that Hardy School had met adequate yearly progress, AYP, for 10 consecutive years. It was the only school that in the city, in the District of Columbia, that had done it for 10 consecutive years. And the other thing you said, the principal is not a full-time principal at this stage. So, you know, Mr. Pope was supposedly designated to create the plan for a new arts school in the city. Now, how are we going to open a new art school? We can't even, we don't even have one middle school right here in Ward 5 at this stage. So, you know, the observations that you make are absolutely correct, and it's the kind of thing that unfortunately gets people going about education reform in the city, when we should be focused on working together and building these experiences, building a school community. And this is one of those experiences that tore down a school community, in my opinion. The school community at Hardy is a lot more dysfunctional today than it was a year ago at the same time. You know, some people have asked me that, and I think those are decisions that have to be made in concert with the educational leadership. I'm not going to try to be a mayor who runs the middle schools and runs the high schools and runs the elementary schools and whatnot. I think that's the wrong thing to do. But I think a part of what we want to be able to do is to make sure the school communities are respected, that parents, the stakeholders, have a say in how their schools are run. And that's one of the things that unfortunately has never been clear to me about the decisions that were made at Hardy. And, you know, we had the kids to come down. We did an impromptu hearing. I don't know if you were with the group that came down. Were you with the group that came down to the Wilson Building? And we did an impromptu hearing. Mr. Thomas was there. I was there. I think Councilmember Kwame Brown was there. And we sat there for an hour and a half and listened to the students who were quite eloquent in their statements about what had gone on at Hardy. Now, I don't think it's appropriate for me to step in and bring back the principal to Hardy School, because I'm not the school chancellor and I'm not the chief academic officer or any of those things. But I do think that people are owed answers when these kind of changes are made. And as mayor, I want to make sure that those who are vested with these leadership responsibilities give clear answers to people about why things are done.
Denise?
Don, before I take this next question, you have a couple of people in the middle that have been very patiently raising their hands. They're a little closer to you, so hopefully you can get them on the next round.
Mr. Mayor, my name is James Peters. I'm a small business owner in Washington, D.C. How you doing?
How you doing, James?
And as a small business owner, I'm hit with 5 layers of taxes in addition to my personal tax. And under the current administration, they came up with new taxes, but they call them fees. When they inspect my property, they have something called a proactive inspection fee for them coming out to inspect the property. In addition to that, when I go get a permit, they have now something called an enhancement fee. So as a small business owner, I'm taxed to death. To add insult to injury, my properties have been assessed at a lower rate, but my taxes on the properties have gone up. Can you help me understand all of this?
I'll tell you what I do understand, and that is that a fee and a fine is just like a tax. When the budget came over this year, when the mayor sent it over, this is the honest truth, there were 680 proposed increases in fees and fines. And then the statement was made, well, I haven't raised taxes in the last 4 years. Well, you know, to people who experience that, that's a tax like any other thing. And frankly, what the council said is, if you want to raise this, don't send it over here, you do it yourself. You have the regulatory power to be able to do that, and we're not going to do that to people. So every fee and fine in the District of Columbia has been raised. Now, I don't dispute the fact that we need the money, but we ought to be honest and open and transparent with people to say, here's what's not going to get done because we don't have the money. And here's those things that we can't do. This is what they're going to cost. And what are you willing to pay? And frankly, then tell people what the options are as to where the money will come from so that people can be a part of the decision-making themselves. And that hasn't happened. I mean, the one you didn't mention, which I thought you were going to, was the parking meter rates in the District of Columbia. The council refused to raise the parking meter rates anymore. It would have gone up to 25 cents for 5 minutes. And we refused to go to that. It's now 25 cents for 7.5 minutes. And the irony of it all, right, Tommy, is that, you know, you walk around with 2 rolls of quarters in your pocket, you run in and out of wherever you are, put quarters in the meter, and then the worst indignity of all is then when you finally go back out there and you were a minute later, now you have a ticket on your windshield that you have to pay. So I think the question comes down to what does this city want in terms of, and then how are we willing to pay for it? And just a nickel and dime people over and over and over again is not an appropriate way to do that. So I didn't participate in the fee and fine activity because I refused to, and it should have been done a different way.
Okay, Mr. Gray, I see lots of hands, and I don't know how much longer you want to take questions. We said we'd end at 8:30, and you could be here all night. I'm going to give you, therefore, one last question. All right. And let me say that we've been told that all of the questions that you have written on cards or your comments will all be posted on the website for the campaign, and they'll be answered. So if you didn't get answered tonight, you'll still have a chance to get an answer. So here's your last question.
Doesn't it sound like a doozy getting ready to come?
No, it's not a doozy, actually, sir. I thought you'd like this one. What, if anything, are you going to do you have a strategy to combat the write-in campaign for Fenty?
Yes. The strategy is to do 8 town hall meetings and to let people recognize that they already elected the best candidate back in the primary in September.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's give Mr. Gray a hand.
Thank you all.